Upstairs at Froelich, Show 202, Reel 1.
You saw Cruising last night.
Yes,
I have not seen this movie in years. The last time I looked at it was on video, of course, because it's before our time. So I looked at it on a videotape, and it was a really old videotape.
Well, I had the VHS, and I found it at a thrift, and I decided I didn't want to slum it last night, so I actually, I did something illegal. I went on the torrent website and I downloaded a 720p file. Don't tell
anybody.
God,
you son of a bitch!
Yeah, don't tell anybody.
Who the fuck
Okay.
Are you trying to take food out of William Friedkin's kid's mouth or something?
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Well, what did you think of it?
Decent little movie. I really liked it. My buddy who was with me, he had a hard time watching it because he had a real hard time watching it.
Because it was like that. This was back when gay guys were like wearing leather, so it was like the Police Academy scene where they were in the gay bar.
Everybody looked like Rob Halford.
You know. Actually, no, that sounds like Baker Street. I'm sorry, but it does. The music that they use in the Police Academy scene sounds a little bit like Baker Street, but that's
little
okay.
bit.
Dun, 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 dun.
I only had an issue with the ending, but you know what? On careful analysis, I think I got the ending figured out. At least my own interpretation of it. So do you remember how it ends?
I do remember that there was indeed a killer, and that Al Pacino. It's not Ellen Barkin. It's not Ellen Barkin this time. It's somebody else.
Right.
It's like, I don't know. What am I going to do? I got a killer over here. I better grab my gun very quickly. You're under arrest, fella. It's like that, right?
That's that fucked up Pacino impression. But anyway, so he catches the killer. It's pretty much determined that this guy is the killer. But then you figure out that the place where Al Pacino was staying in, the gay guy, the upstairs neighbor, he was brutally murdered, and they think it was his roommate that did it. But then you flash forward to Al Pacino going back into Karen Allen's apartment, and he's shaving, he's washing his face. Then Karen Allen finds the hat, the leather jacket, and the frickin', shooting glasses and everything. And then Al Pacino just gives that stare in the mirror.
So it's like, so it is Sea of Love, but without Michael Rooker or Ellen Barkin.
Exactly.
Hey, that must be Ellen Barkin.
My interpretation of the ending is that Al Pacino basically started becoming gay by hanging around all these gay people, and to disassociate himself with becoming gay, he killed the only gay guy he was attracted to by donning the guise of the killer, the S&M killer.
If I'm not mistaken, in the arteriogram scene in The Exorcist, there is a arteriogram specialist and playing himself in the movie, and he became a murderer. And if I'm
really?
Yeah, and I'm not mistaken, it might have been some of the basis for Cruising a little bit.
I swear, Billy Friedkin's got like the worst juju of all time, man.
He was like a very talented filmmaker. Of course, he still is, but
Killer Joe was fucking awesome.
He is like, well, he tends to like do these things that are really kind of crazy in a way. And he always wanted to do things that were audacious, which is interesting because we're going to talk about Heaven's Gate now, about another filmmaker who just kind of wanted to do things his own way and damn the consequences. But, like Friedkin had Fox money to fuck around with, and he's had money from other companies to screw around with as well. So, but that's not the case with Cimino.
Yeah, Cimino was just too big, too fast, didn't have time to do any middle ground, just literally hit the pavement, firing on all fucking cylinders, trying to make the great American epic.
I guess there had to have been something. I mean, like, the thing is, when you're a filmmaker, there's always a little voice in the back of your head asking, are you going a little too far with this? And you have to think about it that way. The way he is represented in, say, the documentary, the documentary that was on the Trio Network,
Final Cut.
It was sort of based only really in part on the book, because the book is a much, much bigger story that starts with the beginning of time. In the beginning, God created United Artists, and Stephen Bach goes from there, and he tells this whole massive story about how the incredible tradition of United Artists, because United Artists was a company that was founded by actors. It was founded by the biggest actors of their time because they didn't want to deal with studios or something, even though what they did in essence was create a studio, right?
Right, but they always said it was a filmmaker studio, like from inception to until the executives took until it ended. It was a filmmaker studio. It's like, hey, make your movie here. You won't get hassled with like the big studios.
Right, and Stephen Bach starts his story with the Transamerica purchase of United Artists and how it led to the departure of key executives in 1979. Who left to form Orion, and Orion was kind of like the same concept. It was sort of like this, come to us, we will leave you alone kind of philosophy. But I think the filmmakers at least had a little more respect for those executives for like the 10 or so years I think it ran before it eventually ran itself into the ground. And it ran itself into the ground from this very same problem that United Artists had, and we talked about before, Canon had. It's this need to be respected by spending lots and lots of money. Stephen Bach is in the back of a cab, and he's like, have you ever heard of United Artists? The cab driver goes, oh, the movie company. He's like, well, why are we going to the Transamerica building? And he says, well, Transamerica bought United Artists. And it's like, what? He didn't understand the whole idea. And this was exactly what they were trying to, Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith tried to avoid, was that some fucking conglomerate would eventually come along and buy them up. And that's exactly what you do. When a company is out there, you try to consume it. And then, it's like Disney, what Disney is doing these days, right?
Exactly. They bought Fox.
Just
they
buy
bought
fucking
Lucasfilm.
everything. Just buy everything, and then you'll own everything. That's the American dream, really, right?
It is the American dream. I mean, you look at what happened with the Transamerica purchase. So the first thing they did was they got rid of Arthur. This was right at the beginning. They got rid of Arthur Krim, and they installed these two executives. I don't even know who their names were. But then after like the first couple of years, they weren't getting any hits. They brought back Arthur Krim, and all of a sudden the hits started rolling. Like that's when Woody Allen started becoming a big voice in the company.
Woody Allen left. He went to make movies with Arthur Krim
Orion.
At the Orion Company. Orion made a lot of really successful movies, and they disappeared too. I mean, it was like right after, Dances with Wolves winds up winning the Oscar, and the company is on the verge of bankruptcy. It's like a weirdest thing. Silence of the Lambs as well.
It's just so many bad movies came out of that company. I mean, you remember UHF was supposed to be their savior.
UHF.
It tested so well. It tested, better than the original RoboCop. They figured this movie's going to make a ton of money, and what happened? It flopped. And it flopped because it was literally like a fucking drop in the bucket compared to all the sequels. Remember?
Oh, that other one. Oh, we talked about, remember, Trimark. Too. Was it Trimark?
Oh yeah, it's Trimark, but they got bought. You see, they got bought by Lion.
No. I'm sorry. Vestron is who I was thinking of.
Yeah, Vestron got bought by. They went bankrupt. They got bought by. Who the fuck bought them? Live bought them, and then Live bought Trimark, and then Live became Artisan, and Artisan became Lionsgate.
Yeah. So you have this Heaven's Gate now. Heaven's Gate started as Cimino had the script running around for 10 years. He had submitted that script back in 1970, and this was a time when westerns were dead. Nobody was investing in him. He gets a name for him. Well, actually, his benefactor winds up being Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood hires Michael Cimino for a couple of gigs. He even co-wrote the script for Magnum Force, which is my second. First favorite Dirty Harry movie would probably be Sudden Impact. Dirty Harry second, of course. Magnum Force I just love because I love the idea of a bunch of sleazy assholes getting machine gunned and bombed in their swimming pool. I just love that. But that was like back.
I love that. I mean, that's the perfect order for Dirty Harry. I mean, that was what we were going to say about Cimino. Before we get completely into Heaven's Gate, you have to start at the beginning. He was what he did commercials,
Mm.
and then he had some spec scripts. He did Silent Running. He wrote that script.
Yeah.
And then he helped Clint Eastwood write the script for Magnum. No, it was John Milius. Excuse me, I was wrong. That was John Milius and Michael Cimino both wrote the script for Magnum Force.
Yeah.
And Eastwood loved it so much, he said, "Hey, you want to do my next movie?"
Yeah.
And he did Thunderbolt and Lightfoot.
Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, which got really good reviews. Jeff Bridges got an Academy Award nomination for that. It broke him out. He was the big breakout star. The Deer Hunter was next, and that was like a very big movie. You know, the thing about it is, though, upon reevaluation, well, I was never really a big fan of The Deer Hunter. I thought it was kind of audacious in that way because there's things about it you remember. Like there's a lot of things that you remember about certain movies. The Russian roulette scene in the Vietnam War segments of The Deer Hunter, things like that. The escape from Saigon.
The wedding.
But you know, this goes back to a point that I make in the article that I wrote. Ambiance is the thing about Cimino's movies. His movies are so, that's, you know, Heaven's Gate is a movie that in its regular form is 3 hours and 37 minutes long. Most of that 3 hours is just taken up with atmosphere. He's creating like this enormous world, and you completely believe it. Let's begin this by saying, just to show our hand, right? Because you and I both agree on this. This is an astounding movie. This is an incredible movie to watch. This is not what people were led to believe for so many years, that this is one of the worst movies ever. To call this one of the worst movies ever is ridiculous.
Nowhere near one of the worst movies ever made. It is a beautiful film.
This is a movie that should have been nominated for Best. It should have gotten all the Oscar, at least the nominations, you know? It should have cleaned up at the Oscars and gotten some form of respect and some form of legitimacy. There is so much antipathy for this movie, and I don't understand it, because I looked at, you know, basically the high def version of this movie, which is the only way to watch it, because this changed my opinion. I did not think that much of this movie when I first saw it, I believe on an MGM UA VHS tape, the big gray box version of it, the two big gray boxes of it. It looked like absolute shit. The image was completely wrong. Everything was in this weird sepia tone. You couldn't really make anything out, and also it was pan and scan. Now, when you look at this, the way it was intended, and this was the way Cimino intended to be shown, in widescreen, everything makes so much more sense. There's so much more going on in this movie than you would be able to understand looking at only half the image on a videotape, you know?
Oh, exactly. I mean, I saw it on pan and scan back in 2000. I rented it from Hollywood Video because I had just seen The Deer Hunter, and I was really into Michael Cimino. I'm like, what else did this guy make? And I found out he made Heaven's Gate. I had no idea about the big bomb that it was. When I saw it the first time, I was kind of like, it wasn't horrible. But then I eventually got it on Laserdisc, and then I saw it in widescreen for the first time. The DVD was easy to get, but I wasn't trying to spend $10 or $15, you know?
Yeah.
I watched it on Laserdisc. I at least got
DVD
to see
still had the same problems, even if you were looking at a widescreen version.
It was the same exact transfer. They used the same transfer for the DVD and the Laserdisc. It was just the DVD was anamorphically enhanced, from what I understand it was, but that was like the only thing it had in its court.
Right.
You know, it's the same shit transfer. I mean, it looked better than anything that had preceded it, but in this day and age, it looks like total shit. But at least after I saw it on Laserdisc, I had a much greater appreciation for it. And I think at that time I had seen the Final Cut documentary.
Yeah. And then you look at this Criterion Blu-ray,
and then you're blown.
It's like a completely different movie. This is a completely different movie. It's almost like you had been looking at a one translation of Don Quixote's Man from I'm sorry. Was it Man from? No, it wasn't.
Man of La Mancha.
I'm sorry. It was, well, I mean, if you look at Cervantes' translation, one translation of Don Quixote for years, and you're convinced that's what the story is about, and then you look at a new translation of it with different words, and it reinterprets the whole thing for you. That's what it's like looking at this Blu-ray of Heaven's Gate. This movie's a masterpiece. It is absolutely, it is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen. The way it was shot, even the way it's acted too, with some of the things that I have problems with, like Isabelle Huppert, which we'll get into, but it's so firmly made in that period. It's so timeless. It's like a movie that could play today. You could actually, I think you could Put this movie in 3,000 theaters today, and I think it would be a big roaring success. I think we've gotten past the point of hating this, because for me, with the critics and everything, it's like it became hip to hate this movie. When you look at all the
nobody
bad reviews.
nobody reviewed the movie. They just were mad at the fact that a studio would blow $40 million on this thing.
Like it cost so much, but they were cruel to it in a way that they weren't cruel to, say, a movie like Cleopatra, because
no, they tore Cleopatra apart. The critics hated Cleopatra.
I don't remember the critics hating Cleopatra nearly as much as they hated Heaven's Gate.
But they hated it. But the only reason that Cleopatra was a success was because she was Elizabeth Taylor was fucking around with Richard Burton at the time.
Yeah, and it made money.
Thank God for the tabloids of the 1960s for at least saving Fox from fucking going bankrupt.
These days, movies throw that money away regularly. A movie comes out. We just had what amounts to a flop recently with the new Terminator movie. It's not making the money that it should have been making, and it cost a lot of money to make.
Because that was the thing. Nobody cared. Nobody gave a shit about this new Terminator movie. Nobody gave a crap that James Cameron came back and that freaking what's his face, Tim Miller, who directed Deadpool. Nobody cared. Okay.
Nobody cared.
I mean, I assume you've read the spoilers already because we're past spoiler territory now.
I do know that one of the things about Terminator Dark Fate is you're supposed to ignore the previous two Terminator movies, and that this is like a
so I'll say it right now, and I'm sorry in advance if you didn't know this. John Connor gets killed in the first 2 minutes.
Ah, yes, yeah. That's because we have to make a movie about really mannish women with muscles this time around, which is kind of strange because Terminator and Terminator 2 both had Linda Hamilton as a heroine in them. And James Cameron, you can accuse him of a lot of things, but you can't accuse him of being sexist. You really can't.
Not in the least. The whole problem with the movie is, and some people have already summed it up, the movie is what they call woke.
Yeah.
It's woke.
No,
and that's why it failed. And you know what? Let it fail. I had my own problems with the movie. I didn't hate it. I think it was better than any of the other Terminator movies, save for parts 1 and 2. But at the same time, it had a lot of problems.
Now, considering what is spent on movies today and how much it costs to break even, Terminator Dark Fate is going to lose way more money than Heaven's Gate ever lost. And then there's a list. You can go to Wikipedia and look at a list right now of the biggest box office failures. Heaven's Gate doesn't even show up on the list anymore because there's so many. It's just that this time I think
one of the bigger ones.
I think that the big problem with the antipathy toward Heaven's Gate a few years after its release was that it seemed to allegedly destroy a studio, United Artists, that it caused a studio to lose its value overnight.
It's half true. Everyone says this is the movie that bankrupted a studio. That is so far from the truth. It just caused Transamerica to get out of the film business. They're like, we're done. Who wants to buy this film company? You do, MGM? All right, it's yours. We're done.
That movie is the reason why it's MGM UA. Now, I mean, it's why you always see MGM UA together in the same sentence. MGM sort of acquired United Artists Library, but then MGM UA tended to be bought by other companies as well. So
and then what's funny is what nobody ever mentions, what they don't mention. I mean, at least they might mention the book, but they don't mention it in the documentary. For Your Eyes Only came out that summer, and it was huge. It made over $100 million.
United Artists had properties. They had the Rocky movies and they had the James Bond movies. That was sort of the thing, is that United Artists never spent that kind of money on a movie before. Usually their budgets were low to medium. They never had like big budget movies. They always seemed to have been able to and they always had that clout too, because of the fact that they were founded by those 4 celebrities as a way of bringing in very talented filmmakers and artists to make their movies for them, rather than deal with the quote-unquote studio system. And then that is what eventually becomes of them, is that they become a big major studio because they were bought by a corporation.
It's sad, but this 1979, it was just rough for them because because you got to figure Apocalypse Now had already started filming when Arthur Krim was part of the studio.
Right.
But it was still going on even after Arthur Krim had made his exit. But luckily for them, Apocalypse Now ended up hitting. It
took a little while for Apocalypse Now. That was another movie that cost a lot, but Coppola had money from other sources, like I believe Paramount also invested in the movie.
Actually, I think he invested in himself because he already had Zoetrope.
Oh yeah. He mortgaged his house, I think, at one point. But Coppola is another guy. Coppola is not Cimino. Cimino will not put his various holdings up for sale to finish a movie. Cimino was like, you know what? Okay, this is my theory about Cimino and his involvement in Heaven's Gate for United Artists. He said, this is my big chance. He had his Oscars for Deer Hunter, so he had his respect and his clout. And then he made United Artists pay through the nose for a contract that gave him virtually unlimited powers. And if you're not a producing director, like, say, like even perhaps a Coppola or a Friedkin or a Kubrick, more importantly, then you're not going to really have the responsibility for that money. So he got his friend, Joanne Corelli, to produce for him. He's like, hey, how'd you like to be a producer? She's like, okay. And so she was there just basically approving everything Cimino did. And I think Cimino had this because he's a film, if you're a film director and you are being given this unlimited unparalleled freedom at the end of this film director era that was going on, right? You're going to try and do as much as you possibly can because you'll never have this opportunity again. I think even Cimino knew that. I don't think Cimino was like, oh my God, I'm going to parlay Heaven's Gate into this picture and I'm going to do this picture. I think what he wanted to make his mark there. And unfortunately, I mean, like, if he didn't have the bad press, this would have been, his masterpiece. This would have been something that would have been looked upon very differently.
I mean, can you only imagine watching this movie at 5.5 hours? It was originally conceived?
I know. I kind of know what that feels like, to think that every little image, every little piece of dialogue, every little scene in your movie is so important that it should remain. A lot of times people can't look at it through other eyes. Sometimes, if he had like a girlfriend or a wife or something and he said, okay, honey, what do you think of my movie? And be honest with me. Then she would have said, you could cut this down to about 2.5 hours, Mike. Retain the story. You don't need all this ambiance. And then Cimino would be like, I'm sort of imagining an argument in my head between two people because I've had this argument with people. But all that ambiance cost me like $30 million. I mean, this movie could have been done for $15 million, but I spent $30 million on ambience. We built everything. Everything is built and everything works in this movie. Look at that train. We built that fucking train for this movie.
You know how much of a shyster he was during the production? Like, he was making money on the back end that nobody knew about. You knew that, right?
No. Refresh my memory on that one.
The land that they were using, they were paying ridiculously high amounts of costs to film on that land. That land was owned by Michael Cimino.
You're right. That's in the book. Yeah, that is in the book. He did, and also, he purchased a bunch of land because he, quote unquote, fell in love with Montana where they were shooting it, right?
Right.
He fell in love with it, but it went up for sale. In one of the epilogues of the book, it back noted that Cimino put the land up for sale like sometime in the mid-'80s.
And then he made money off the music because he bought the rights to the music.
He bought the rights to the music. David Mansfield was a friend of his. David Mansfield is in the movie. He plays the fiddle player
he's also in the whorehouse. And
they were like, UA. There's some memos going back and forth between UA, Joanne Corelli, and Michael Cimino because David Mansfield was Joanne Corelli's boyfriend. She basically got him the gig to do the music, in addition to him playing the fiddle in the movie. And they're like, "Who the fuck is David Mansfield? Why can't we get John Williams for this score or something?" And nobody wanted to say anything.
But John Williams doing a Western, though? Come on, that's a little outlandish.
Well, they wanted somebody big. That's why all the names that they wanted, they wanted
Elmer Bernstein would have been like the choice.
It could have been Elmer Bernstein.
Because it's an American Western. You got to remember, I would have said Ennio Morricone, but you leave that to the Italian Western.
Well, the thing about it is the score is so good, though. I mean, it's like it's like this weird minimalist kind of thing where you have guitars and you have a little piano and you have a lot of violin in there, and it's a wonderful score. And Mansfield went on to do more music for him later. He had a very good score for that I own, actually, Desperate Hours, his movie with Mickey Rourke. Anthony Hopkins and Mimi Rogers. It's a decent movie. It is a really good movie, and Mansfield's score for it is really good. I think Cimino worked. He continued to work with the people that he really enjoyed working with. He would work with Vilmos Zsigmond again. He would work with all of his a lot of people would show up again.
And what's funny, you hear like how hated this movie was. Okay, Kris Kristofferson, Vilmos Zsigmond, and friggin' Jeff Bridges all look back fondly on the movie.
They do. You know, I think they were. It's because a good director tends to seduce you and have a good time working with you and create an environment that's fun. Obviously, they called him the Ayatollah Cimino, basically, but that was just sort of, they were just sort of being affectionate with him because they all loved him and they all loved working with him, and they loved the experience of being at this place called Camp Cimino, where, you know, there's a few mistakes in there, though, in the production. I mean, they're spending money working on pre-production or in production for the movie, but having their actors go take roller skating lessons and lessons, horse riding lessons, and lessons firing a gun. And I'm like, that's not how you do it. I think the best method would be to take your actors, cast them, right, and then send them off for their lessons or whatever, and then bring them to Montana. And when you're absolutely ready, shoot the movie. They were building sets as they were shooting the movie, so that's a whole bunch of headaches, and it costs a lot of money.
You go back to Jim Cameron, you see when he did The Abyss, everybody had to become deep sea diving certified, right? But they weren't doing that during the production of the movie. They did that before production started.
Yeah, it's a George Lucas thing. George Lucas always said, get everything built, get everything ready to go, then bring your actors in. That's how you save money. And
then to a lesser extent, you can say George Cosmatos did the exact same thing when he did Leviathan.
Well, yeah, I mean, these are low budget techniques. This is like Roger Corman level filmmaking. This is Roger Corman's school of filmmaking, and I don't think Cimino knows anything about how Roger Corman made movies. You know,
he didn't, and that was the thing. You know, if he would have started off like Cameron or even Coppola, for God's sake, okay, Cameron or Coppola, they knew. Oh, and even to a better extent, like Joe Dante. Okay, these guys studied under Corman. Okay, Corman's the king. They learned lessons that if Cimino knew these lessons, maybe he would have made a better movie. Maybe he would have had a longer career.
Because,
knew what the fuck he was doing.
Yeah. When you think about the movie, the things that stick out for the movie, the qualities in its favor, are the qualities that really have nothing to do with what he was trying to do. Yeah, the authenticity is fantastic. The costumes, the sets, the production design, the music, and everything like that. It's all wonderful and everything, but it's just sort of icing. Now, what really drives me to consider Heaven's Gate as one of the greatest films ever made is the message of it, or the issues present in it. Let's talk a little bit about the story. It's supposed to take place in Johnson County, Wyoming. Now, these are real people too, and he took liberties because
he took severe liberties.
Like, none of these people are actually what they are in the movie in real life. James Averill, Nate Champion, Ella Watson, people like that, they actually did exist, but they did not do in real life what they were purported to do in the movie, in the fictional. So the story of Heaven's Gate is that there was a horrible battle between homesteaders that were immigrants. They basically came to this country. And then there's the Stock Growers Association. The Stock Growers Association has a meeting of a bunch of rich white men. They talk about what are they going to do about the immigrant problem. Well, you know what? Donald Trump's not around. We can't build a wall, so let's just fucking kill them. And they're like, okay,
what's more sad
we're offering,
about that,
$50? Was it like $50 per head or something like that?
$5 a day, $50 a head.
Yeah. And that was the idea. And this is a, you know, it really should be released today. I told you, it's timely. This is a timely, because we are having this question now. Of course, this is not the way to go. You know, this is America.
One of the things you're forgetting, though,
what?
That was sanctioned by the U.S. government.
That's Cimino's thesis. We don't know that that's actually true. I remember reading this in the book, that Cimino says that not only the governor of Wyoming sanctioned this, but the president of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, I think Andrew Johnson, approved this. And Samuel Waterston says it like twice in the movie. He says, this is from the president. You know, and Samuel Waterston's a real bastard in the movie, too.
Oh, yeah, he's a fucking jerk-off.
And he's great. He's wonderful in the movie. He's a great bad guy.
He's a fucking jerk-off, but that's like he's one of the best characters in the movie because he's a guy you'd love to hate.
Oh, yeah. And like, even toward the end, you know what happens at the end? I won't spoil it yet. But this is the whole idea, is that we are not going to let these people suck up our resources, so we're going to fucking kill them. They might as well be undocumented, right? Because they didn't have paperwork back then, so fucking kill them all. And it turns into an all-out war. It is a truly American story, yes, but this is not how the greatest scene in this movie is when I think it's Kris Kristofferson's character is leaning over a dead body, and he says to Sam Waterston, "You were right. You were in the right, but this is not the right way to go about it. What you did here." And that to me is an incredible scene, because it's not necessarily being ambiguous. What it is saying is, yes, it is wrong to come to a country, perhaps rob it of its most valuable resources without offering any kind of compensation, but it is even more wrong to take the law into your own hands and murder these people for doing it. That, to me, is astounding. This is a message that you don't really see in movies, is that sometimes bad people can have reasons for doing, and the right reasons for doing something, but the wrong way to go about it.
I mean,
this is not what we do in America, kids. I have to point this out. America, this is the greatest country in the world. And the reason it's the greatest country in the world is because we open our doors to people. We tell them, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, and come here, yearning to be free. This is what we're supposed to be doing here in this country. We're not supposed to. This is not Nazi fucking Germany. You know?
It's not. The thing is, like, I agree with you. These cattle barons had the right to defend their property, because that's what America is built on, the right to defend property.
Yeah.
But like you said, you shouldn't slaughter people who are innocent amongst the guilty.
It's a very deep message. And this is a Western of all things. I mean, it's kind of like, it's got all the trappings of the Old West, but it's not a Western in the way that John Wayne movies were a Western, or High Noon or something like that.
It's a real Western. There
is actually literally a scene in this movie where at the end of the battle, a woman is lying against an overturned wagon. She puts both barrels of a shotgun in her mouth and blows her brains out in front of Jeff Bridges. And I'm like, my God, this is a fucking Western we're watching here. It's about the futility of everything. And it's so beautifully constructed in that way.
Oh, it's even though it has some inauthenticities, it's authentic to how it was back then, you know? And that was, I think, the folly of the movie, is because nobody wanted to be reminded of this. It's like when you think about
or maybe
history. I mean, I told this to a friend of mine, and he agreed with me. When you were growing up, when you went to middle school, right? Middle school, elementary school, whatever. When you took a history class, what did you learn about? You learn about the Civil War. You learn about World War I, World War II, and then maybe in my case, not so much yours. You learn about Vietnam. I mean, I learned about Vietnam, but you learned about Korea.
Yeah. Well,
other stuff
and everything. Everything we got was in our generation. I'm talking. Well, my generation might be a little bit different from yours, but in my generation of schooling, we were taught that America was the greatest country in the world, and the history is written by the victors. So we read from this the story of America to represent us as being the greatest, because that's just what we do, right? Now, Regan was telling me something really disturbing the other day, something about, what was it? What were you telling me?
We were, like, learning about, like, explorers.
Explorers.
Oh, and there was something I didn't tell you? Okay.
Can you come a little bit closer to the mic so that John can hear you?
There was something I actually didn't say, but the teacher was talking about a certain explorer, somebody who had died, and the teacher said that the explorer had died, and the class started cheering.
The class started cheering because an explorer had died. But you were telling me something about how what was it? Something about
Christopher Columbus.
Right, Christopher Columbus.
Something about that I kind of felt pressure to write a certain view because the kids in the class, not because of the teacher or anything. Well, I mean, kind of, but I'm not going to get into that.
Right.
Just that the kids in the class would kind of just make fun of me because of certain views that I had. So I kind of just bluffed my way through a certain essay.
So you felt pressure to write something about how what the first explorers who came here should have stayed at home or gone home.
No, not that. It was something about Columbus Day, if it should remain a holiday, and I felt pressure to write that it shouldn't when I actually believe that it should.
All right, thank you, Regan. But that's my point right there. This revisionist kind of ideology that says that we are all just a bunch of monsters and murderers, and, we founded our country on blood and violence and rape. This is not what I was taught when I was a kid. Was it taught that way when you were a kid?
No, and that's the point I was getting to about history. Like you said, history favors the victors, okay? Nobody in 1979, 1980 wanted to hear a story about the footnote, a footnote
Right,
in American history. Nobody wanted to hear about it, and especially a depressing footnote.
But it was an important footnote, though. Even though if it wasn't as big as the way, actually, it's funny because Cimino kind of makes a bigger deal out of something that was kind of limited. It was more, what the story of the Johnson County thing should have been more along the lines of Magnum Force, like a vigilante thing where people snuck out and just sort of blew people's brains out. Like at the beginning of the movie, Christopher Walken's got the gun, he shoots it through that sheet. That's more along the lines. It wasn't this big magnanimous battle that looked gorgeous in a wide shot or something like that. It was more like they were sending out these guys to systematically slaughter people.
And it's it's so hard to think. We don't want to, this is the kind of thing people don't want to know about.
Isn't that interesting, though?
Remember, when you're going to school, you're a sheep.
We're talking about this movie, and we're talking about it as a portion of our history, and this is what people should have been talking about when the movie was released, instead of, this costs too much money, it dragged on. What, is one of the funnier lines from somebody that they had talked to who had just come out of seeing the movie. He said it was real fanny torture. And I thought that was really funny.
Twitcher. It's like, wow, that's how we talked back in the 80s. Okay, part of me's glad I didn't live through it.
But the thing is, the movie did have intermissions back then. Movies like that, they had intermissions. Nowadays, you see a 3-hour movie, and it's like you got to sit in your fucking seat because you are in for the long haul, and your ass is going to grow
Now,
loose.
that's the one thing you did notice about the new Blu-ray. The intermission card was taken out. That was at the behest of Michael Cimino for the new director's cut.
Because he, we have pause buttons now. We can just pause the motherfucker, get up, get a beverage. We can even take a day off, take a week off, get back to the Blu-ray. It'll remember where we are, that kind of thing. But I did want to bring up the prologue. This prologue goes on for like 20 minutes or so, and it takes place at Harvard commencement ceremonies. Kris Kristofferson is graduating. They make him look young by shaving his beard. They have John Hurt there with this cute little speech, and then we move forward. So it's like the idea, actually, even I felt the prologue was didn't really need to be there.
It didn't need to be.
I said the movie should begin with the death list. Set up, do your nice beauty shot of Wyoming there, and all the set that they built or whatever they needed to build for that, and start with the death list, establish your characters. But he wanted to do this kind of thing where he established these characters to be rich, powerful white men graduating from Harvard. And he didn't even shoot it at Harvard. He went to fucking Oxford and shot this because I guess he didn't like the way
Harvard wouldn't allow it. Harvard wouldn't allow it.
I guess, okay, Harvard wouldn't allow it, so he takes it to Oxford and gets a really nice-looking university that was built at the turn of the century or looks as old enough, and has this enormous scene of these people graduating, but he also has them doing raucous things, like as with the Deer Hunter, they have like this wedding scene in the Deer Hunter, and everybody is getting a little too drunk and a little too angry, and there's some fist fighting going on. So he's kind of doing this thing where he's showing the human condition, all these violent men, and then they go out west to tame a land, right? And James Averill, played by Kris Kristofferson, really good in the movie too, by the way. Everybody's really good in this movie, is out there, and he's about doing the right thing. So he wants to protect these people that are being menaced by the Stock Growers Association, because he actually kind of has a vested interest in it because of basically, what is the reason why men do good things? It's for the big P word, if you will. And he's got a girlfriend who is a bordello madam, and her name is Ella Watson, played by Isabelle Huppert, who I can barely fucking understand in this movie. I had to turn on the subtitles to understand her fucking dialogue.
I know, even that's one of the weak points in the movie. Granted, she became a great actress over time.
Well, she was well respected in Europe anyway. And then she did a few more American movies. She even worked for Hal Hartley, I believe. But the thing is, I can't think of anybody else that I would want to play that role. They didn't like her. UA, or the executives, didn't like her because they couldn't understand her. And one of them said that she wasn't attractive. One of them even said she has a face like a potato. That's in the book. And Cimino's like, I think she's sexy, and is like, and the thing is, she's wonderful. There's a certain reality about her because of her heavy accent, even though she is barely intelligible. But I can't imagine there are other options. They were thinking about Meryl Streep. Maybe Meryl Streep could have pulled it off a little bit because she had done some work where she wasn't playing American characters. And then she goes on to, sit in the bathtub with Clint Eastwood in The Bridges of Madison County. You totally believe her. She's wonderful in the role.
But then you got to also understand the nudity that was required in the part.
Oh yeah.
She's especially
she's running
the rape
around.
scene.
She's frolicking in the water, and she's completely stark naked through a lot of the movie too. There's also Diane Keaton. They were talking about they want to Diane Keaton. I'm like, no, this isn't going to work with somebody.
Annie Hall is not tame for this movie. No.
What you need is someone almost completely unknown, because and it was kind of unheard of back then for a movie of this scope to have a relatively unknown actress in it. So that's why the cast is incredible. You've got Kris Kristofferson, and you've got Christopher Walken, and you've got Sam Waterston, you've got John Hurt, Jeff Bridges, you have Joseph Cotten in his final role, I think, in the Harvard scene. And then you've got all these people who have become enormous stars.
Yeah, I would say the up and comers are one of the best parts of this movie. You've got Terry O'Quinn.
And he gets lines, and he gets a close up, and he's got hair and a beard.
Tom Noonan.
You have Tom Noonan playing one of the dirty rapists in the movie. You have Mickey Rourke. You have Brad Dourif. Brad Dourif, probably a little more well known.
Well, he had already been nominated for an Oscar at that point. So
he was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and got a nomination for an Oscar. And
Richard Masur at the beginning of the movie as the conductor of the train
Richard
station.
Masur, who is Bonnie Franklin's boyfriend in One Day at a Time, and then he would later be in The Thing, and it's just an incredible. Also, have never been able to spot in this movie, and he narrates
Willem Dafoe.
He narrates
right?
the trio documentary, but I can never spot him in the movie.
He said they said it's a blip on the microscope where he's at, because all his footage was destroyed because he got fired, but he was in a blip during the cockfighting scene. Okay.
This movie has real cockfighting in it, which was not okay. The thing is, the cockfighting and all the horse falls and all the stuff that they did that might have been deemed cruel to animals was not yet a regulation that was completely forbidden. In fact, it's argued that the Humane Society had lobbied after the movie was released to begin supervising productions involving animals.
And they did, because do you remember in the trio documentary you saw when they were having the second premiere after he edited it down to 2.5 hours, there were people picketing in the background?
Oh, really?
I
have no doubt that the Humane Society bitched. I have no doubt that they bit, but whether or not that movie was the actual reason for it might have been other things, because Roger Corman did a movie called Cockfight, and it wasn't what you think. It's not as dirty as it sounds. And they were extremely pissed off about that. So they probably just sort of grouped everything. You know what? You're being too cruel to the great white sharks and Jaws. And nobody had the heart to tell them. The movie did kind of, I guess, kick off that wave. So now everything is done under strict animal supervision, even though my cats have been in a couple of my movies and nobody ever gave me a hard time. So
but then what you see, we got to talk about how the bad press started.
All right, I got it for you right there. A gentleman named Lescape. He was a writer for some 20 years, working on Wall Street, basically doing Wall Street work. Quit his job. He would write for the New York Times and stuff like that. He quit his job. He moved his wife out to Montana, and he bought a cherry orchard. And the weather in Montana is famously unpredictable, and it destroyed his cherry orchard, and with it, all the investment he put into it. So he went back to seeking work as a writer. He found out that Heaven's Gate was shooting nearby and that they had a press blackout. Now, that is another reason for the antipathy right there, is the press blackout. Cimino didn't want anybody on set trying to get interviews or try to sneak photos or anything like that. He had a complete closed media thing going on. Only approved pictures were sent out because he didn't want anybody. He probably didn't want, part of it might have been, he didn't want the studio getting any word of anything, and he didn't want any other people getting any word of what he was doing out in Montana when he was shooting. Lescape grows his hair out a little bit, puts on his little John Lennon glasses that he had, grew a beard, and he found a period suit, went out there and auditioned as an extra. They hired him at $30 a day. They were paying their extras $30 a day, but he was writing an article about how the extras were treated poorly. Now, extras did not get that kind of money in 1979. $30 a day is a lot of money in 1979. And the way Cimino was shooting this movie, these people were doing very well for themselves. So he goes out there. He is even in 3 shots. I identified him in the movie. I saw Les Capet in the movie. I did not see Willem Dafoe, but I saw Les Capet. Apparently, Cimino loved his face. He said, this guy's got a perfect face for an immigrant. Because he is Hungarian, actually. I believe he was born in Hungary. And he comes from a family of Hungarians. So he's kind of perfect for the part, really. I mean, even if you didn't want to put him in as an extra, you could put him in saying a couple of lines. You could probably fake an accent for you or something.
And then you wonder if he got paid any extra for that, because it's like, okay, $30 a day is an extra, but if you're speaking extra, don't you get a little more?
You should, yeah. If you say more than five lines, I think you're called an under five when you have less than 5 lines, and you're not paid a SAG minimum for that. But if you get more than 5 lines, you're suddenly on SAG time and you're making really good money. But even then, $30 a day. I mean, that was fantastic.
That's 1979 money right there.
Yeah. That's like
I think that's about $100 a day right now. About that, I'd say.
I think it could be even more than $100 a day. But can you imagine working on that shoot for every day? Look at all the crowd scenes in that movie. I mean, there's he was shooting one hell of a whole lot. Over a year, you could make really good money being an extra. They don't pay that kind of money these days. Extras are happy. I know a few extras who go out routinely for major movies or something, and they're happy if they can get a fucking meal.
I mean, then you hear about the other stories about how John Hurt had so much downtime that he went off and made The Elephant Man for David Lynch.
Makes complete sense to me, because Cimino strikes me as the kind of guy who's like, the clouds aren't right. We have to wait here until the clouds are right. I'm sorry, Michael. I just got a call from David Lynch and Mel Brooks. They want me to do The Elephant Man. Go. I'm waiting for the clouds. We'll call you back.
Pretty much. And then the other story I like is about how Jeff Bridges learned how to play music while he was on the set.
Jeff Bridges and Kris Kristofferson, they sat together with guitars and then they also composed a bunch of albums together, from what I read.
The movie was so over budget and so overdone, but yet that's why nobody complains about it, because everyone had a good fucking time.
Yeah, they had a good time. Except they did bitch a little bit about the fact that for some reason, and they should have really thought about this, they should have built a hotel closer to the location or on the location.
Yeah, because they said they were shuffling people. There was maybe an hour. How long was the ride?
It was a 3-hour ride. And Brad Dourif was talking about how you couldn't, because it was fucking exhausting. You had to get up at 3 a.m. in the morning to be there for a 6 a.m. call or something. And he couldn't even get any sleep on the van because it was all fucking rocky roads and shit. So.
And then you get there, and then they don't even shoot your scene for the day because Michael Cimino's on his 50th fucking take.
Yeah, we're not ready for you yet. I still have to get this crack of the bullwhip just right. He wanted to get everything just right. That will drive executives up the wall, especially executives who don't have the money in the first place. I feel like United Artists really didn't have the money for this movie, and we're just like, Jesus Christ, we got to keep sending this money.
They did. I mean, you got to go back to the prior 2 films. You go back to Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. Clint Eastwood was his producer, and Clint Eastwood said 2 takes. That's it.
Clint Eastwood was a 2-take guy. I mean, if you really needed that second take, maybe you could fight to get the second take.
I think the only time they sent a documentary...
Clint Eastwood, the way he shoots movies anyway, he shoots them in 1 take practically. He's like Ron Howard. Ron Howard does that too.
Unfortunately, that shows in some of his later work. That really does show in some of his later work, but that's another story for another time.
I remember a story where Clint Eastwood was shooting Absolute Power with Gene Hackman. He was doing a scene, and Hackman was rehearsing, and Clint Eastwood just says, he goes over to his camera guy and he says, turn the camera on. And so they shoot the scene, and Gene Hackman's all ready to go. He's like, I'm ready. Are we ready to do the take? And he's like, we just did it. He doesn't like to waste time.
So we go to the Deer Hunter. Now, again, granted, the movie went a little over budget, but it was understandable because of conditions and all this other stuff. But at the same time, he didn't have that freedom. He didn't have the freedom he had on Heaven's Gate because 2 studios were backing the Deer Hunter. You had Universal and EMI. They were backing that movie.
Yeah, and he had Michael Dealey up his ass constantly producing.
Right. That was saying he had people up his ass. So then after this he goes, you know what? I don't want to do this 2-take crap. I don't want people up my ass all the time. I just want to go off and do my own thing. And with blackjack and hookers.
I'm going to make my own movie with blackjack and hookers.
That's pretty much what he set out to do, and God damn it, he did it. More power to you.
No, this is one of his gifts that a lot of directors don't actually have, is the ability to create camaraderie in front of the camera. You believe in the Deer Hunter, Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, John Savage, John Cazale, all these people were friends. You believed it. You believe the atmosphere and you believe the ambiance. And that's something that he always wanted to replicate. He even did it like later on in later movies, like Year of the Dragon. And what's that other one? The Sicilian?
The Sicilian, yeah.
He is able to create this atmosphere, and he does it. He does such a wonderful job with this movie, with Heaven's Gate. I mean, it's just a wonderful... You know what's funny about the movie, too? I didn't find it boring in the slightest. I mean, I set it up to watch 1 hour a day, basically, just so I could process everything, because I didn't want to get some kind of overload, some visual overload, because it is visually, it's an incredibly stimulating movie to look at, and the way it's shot and everything else. He even does this thing. Terrence Malick used to do it too, where he would even have a shot going, and the cloud would obscure the suns and roll over a wide open shot, and it would get dark for a second, and then it would get light. These are effects that you can't really achieve. You can't even achieve this with computers, I don't think. And we did talk about the fact that you could probably replicate a lot of this crap with computers now, but it wouldn't look real. It would not look real.
What you would do in this day and age, you'd have the town. Okay, the big opening scene with the town, right? You'd have some foreground shots, but you'd have a lot of background plates.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's what would make it look real, is the background plates. Because back in the 80s, you can't fake a background like that. You can't. You have.
Yeah, he has
all or nothing. It's all or nothing.
He has actual actors interacting with everything and operating things and going in and out of locations, and the way it's all put together. And that does unfortunately cost money, and it costs money to get it right. And the thing is, you could take... I remember, I think I said this to Anderson one time, because we did a special, the Two Davids Walk Into a Bar special about MGM UA home video, and we talked a little bit about Heaven's Gate. And I mentioned that you could actually make the bare bones of this movie for about $5 million in 1979. You could get in there, shoot under a month, get the most important stuff that you need to tell your story without all the added ambience and atmosphere. And you could bring it in for $5 million. If you wanted to add a little bit more, you could have gone to $10 million. I think that's
for
what
your second unit work, though. That's for your second unit work. I agree with you.
You could actually get in there and do that.
Get get Michael Cimino in there, 3 takes or less. Do what you need to do. Get the main shots out of the way. You have your second unit doing all the fill-in shots while the other main actors are in this one side. Get your secondary actors.
Yeah, you need good production management on this to be able to do that.
You do your wide shots at the end.
But instead, it was like a blank check situation where they were shooting in sequence too with the movie. It's not like he went to one location and stayed there. Like, say, the roller skating rink, which the movie is named after. I was not aware of this before, but the movie is actually named after the roller rink.
But which makes sense, because it's like the one place that like the only positives that happen in the movie are at
everybody's having such a wonderful time in the roller skating rink, and this is what people did and all that. But what you could have, rather than shoot all your scenes at that one location to save on money and costs, instead he shoots the next scene in the order. So he shoots everything in sequence in the movie. There are very few reshoots of anything in the movie. It's all completely start to finish the way he shoots the movie, and that'll cost you money.
That's confirmed, right? That he did shoot it in sequence.
Yeah. But
that is so asinine. Why would you do that?
He did that because I think that Joan Corelli really didn't know what she was doing, and that was the thing. If he had gotten who was like a real kick-ass producer, like somebody
back in those days, Bob Evans, dude.
Well, Bob Evans, he would have murdered Bob Evans. He would have shoved a cocaine straw up his nose before Bob Evans ever started trying to tell him what. I mean, Coppola wanted to kill him, right? Bob Evans also, but there's also, oh God,
you got to think of all those
the Jaws guys, Zanuck and Brown.
Oh, Zanuck and Brown. Zanuck and Brown would have been up his ass.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, the thing is, Cimino was kind of a wonderkin because of the success of The Deer Hunter. And to read Vincent Campy's review and then to read Roger Ebert's review, this is another important point I wanted to bring up with you. I feel like they weren't watching the movie. I've reread and reread Roger Ebert's review for Heaven's Gate multiple times. I feel like he doesn't really understand. He's pointing out certain things, and those things were not in the movie. And I felt like he wasn't watching the movie. I feel like he wasn't paying attention to the movie. And I don't think he got anything. His review, and I guess Vincent Campy's review to a smaller extent, doesn't really cover what the movie's actually about. It just covers what it cost.
Yeah, that's all they talk about is the production, about how it was so failed and how there's nothing there. And it's like really. And like, remember the lady who in the Trio documentary, she said even bad movies have one good scene.
Right, Kathleen Carroll for the Daily News or something.
And
Yeah,
it's like,
she
this
said there was
movie
nothing
is-
about this movie that was good. Not even a performance. You can't even single out one performance in this movie. Yes, I can. I can.
Christopher
Everybody
Walken.
in this movie looks real. Everybody. Jeff Bridges found out, I think, that his character, John Bridges, was a relative of his family. And so he put a little extra oomph into it. He got in touch with his grandmother and it's like, tried to find out as much as he could about John Bridges. And he played that character to the hilt. These people are so authentic that they disappear inside it. They disappear inside this movie.
I mean, if you have to dog any performances, and I literally mean any performances in this movie, of course you don't want to dog Isabelle Huppert, but you have to, due to her mumbling of the English language. Okay.
Like,
Rubber
what?
baby buggy bumpers, okay?
The fuck did you just say? She named her horse Taffy. I mean, the thing about Isabelle Huppert, I say in my article that I write that I can't hate her too much. She reminds me of my wife, the way she looks. My wife looks a lot like her, and my wife does have a face like a potato, and she just sort of reminds me of Isabelle Huppert. I think she's wonderful. I think she's I think she's perfect for the movie. It might have been a little bit. It might have been a good idea to have her take some speech classes, maybe get some, because she's not doing anybody any favors. We can't understand her being Americans, and I doubt that her fellow Frenchmen could understand her trying to do English.
Right. The only other performance I have an issue with is Brad Dourif, because he lays on that Slovakian accent a little too thick.
He's a little, he's rolling his R's every time he talks, But
he lays it on so that, I mean, Jeff Bridges, I love that. I love it when he speaks German in the movie. That's fucking great.
I was so disappointed too, because it's a very sad, depressing movie, and there's no, and just when you think they're gonna leave, and fucking Sam Waterston shows up with his guns, fucking slaughters Isabelle Huppert, spoiler, sorry, and Jeff Bridges, before he is then in turn killed. And Kristofferson, it ends with Kristofferson being on a boat. So and he's with the woman, I think, that he was making eyes at.
Yep. His
at
Harvard girlfriend.
So he is like this, I guess, wealthy man who has lost a portion of his soul. Because you look at him and Kristofferson, he had started out as a musician. He wrote Me and Bobby McGee for Janis Joplin, who he was dating. Janis Joplin killed herself, and it created a hole in him, and he stopped performing music for a long time. And then he got into acting because everybody said, you got a face of an actor. You're a good-looking guy, really rugged. He's like an ultra masculine kind of guy, right? And he gets into acting. And he's like, he does the Scorsese movie. He does A Star Is Born. That sort of brings him back to music and everything. And then he winds up falling in love with music again as a result of this movie, and with his like little what do you call those sessions with Jeff Bridges.
But then the good thing is, even though he lost his leading man, because like this was like his first real leading man performance, and like he lost his leading man notoriety in an instant. But he became a great character actor, and he became a great secondary, supporting actor.
Do you remember Lone Star, the John Sayles movie?
Yes, John Sayles, dude.
He was amazing in that movie because he wasn't playing a good guy. When he goes over to this one guy in Lone Star and he says, "You're a dead man." You fucking believe him. I mean, it's like, he's incredible. And also,
to a lesser extent, and this is a severe lesser extent, I love him in Fire Down Below with Steven Seagal.
Fire Down Below, yeah.
He is such a great bad guy in that movie.
I want to mention that when he did the Harvard Prologue, they had him shave his beard off to make him look younger, right? He had done all this stuff before. They did the Harvard Prologue at the end. It was part of a deal that Cimino had. He said, I'll bring the movie under the running time if you let me add this sequence, which is kind of weird. It was in the script. That was sort of like a go or no-go situation of him doing that. He shaved his beard, they shot the scene, and then he went and made Rollover with Jane Fonda. That's why he's clean-shaven in the movie Rollover with Jane Fonda that was released in 1981. Got shot, released, distributed before Heaven's Gate finally had its premiere. That's another movie that you could have done so many different things. I think if I were UA, I'd be like, okay, we'll let Cimino do whatever he wants to do. We're going to use the set for other movies. We're going to get in there. We're going to shoot 5 movies on that set. They spent $30 million building this shit. We're going to go and try to make as much money off of this as we can.
And that makes perfect sense because you said he shot the movie in sequence.
Yeah.
Any of the sets that he got done using, they could have immediately dressed them up and used it for another movie.
Yeah, they could have, absolutely. And I would have gone and I would have, been like, hey, Isabelle, hey, Chris, hey, John, Jeff, you want to make a movie? Here's a script. We're thinking about making a movie on this location again. You want to come here and this is it? And they'll probably say yes, because actors very rarely turned down projects back then. This is a movie that is full of truth, and a lot of that truth is ugly. And again, this wasn't the time for movies like that. This was the time of the new big box office blockbuster where you didn't have an ambiguous ending and your good guys always got away scot-free. It defiantly takes a turn away from that. And that's another reason for its failure, is that it was a 3.5 hour long, completely depressing movie. Doesn't matter how beautiful. Well, a lot of people take for granted beautiful sets, beautiful cinematography.
They do, and I don't disagree. It is a very, very depressing movie. I mean, if you can get through it in one sitting, it takes it out of you. It really does.
I am gonna grab the Blu-ray though. I really want the Blu-ray. I want to see this on my TV.
Well, I think next week's Thanksgiving, Barnes and Noble might be doing a Criterion. I think they're doing a Criterion sale right now. You might want to grab it. I think it's $20.
I'll see if I can get it through DVD Beaver, because they usually have very good discount program that they have with various stores, and they did a very nice review of it. And again, the movie has been reevaluated over the years. It's no longer considered a piece of shit. It's no longer considered one of the worst movies ever. It's no longer considered vindication for Hollywood, that really did not only want to destroy United Artists, but destroy Michael Cimino for what he did. Because I agree with Kristofferson's assessment of it in the documentary. He says this was used as an excuse by the powers that be to take the power away from artists. Because he was, when he talked to Norbert Auerbach, who was one of the executives at UA, and he says, Auerbach said, we have to take control away from the directors. We have to take control of movies away from the creative people. And he talked to him later. He said, who are you going to give the control to? The non-creative people? I mean, I think that's what was intended to be done with this movie. It destroyed the reputation of all filmmakers. That and 1941, Steven Spielberg, Scorsese.
Sorcerer, Friedkin.
Sorcerer, yes. William Friedkin anyway. I mean, just by himself, because he goes and makes movies like Cruisin' too. I mean, it's like, these aren't movies that are approved by a boardroom. Nobody's going to look at the script for Cruisin' and say, that's it. You get $20 million. Congratulations, Mr. Friedkin. Sorcerer was mainly destroyed by Star Wars. It was released a week before Star Wars. Nobody cared about it.
Right. I mean, that was a victim of bad timing. Two studios put up the budget for this thing. And luckily Sorcerer has been reevaluated as a masterpiece of cinema.
But doesn't it
New York's been reevaluated.
It has.
1941's been reevaluated.
It has, yeah.
And then friggin' Heaven's Gate's been reevaluated.
But I think that Heaven's Gate should get that kind of big profile release that Blade Runner got in '92, the director's cut. It should get a release like that.
Now I was going to say there is one more director who fell victim to the new Hollywood curse, but it's not the movie you think, and it's not the director you think. Francis Ford Coppola did become a victim of New Hollywood, and unfortunately it was because he decided to make a musical in 1982 that nobody wanted to see.
Yeah, $40 million, another $40 million movie called One from the Heart.
One from the Heart. I mean, people think it was Apocalypse Now that was responsible for the New Hollywood movement, or the New Hollywood movement ending. It's like, no, Coppola had his bomb with frickin' One from the Heart.
Right.
Because, I mean, and that was the sad part, is he put up the money himself for that movie.
Yeah. And he had this whole weird idea about, like, I'm going to sit in my trailer and look at video monitors and direct there. That's the thing. Nobody, like those other movies we mentioned, New York, Sorcerer, Heaven's Gate, 1941, they've all been reevaluated. One from the Heart has not ever been reevaluated once. Nobody talks about it. I think, yeah, we should definitely get some kind of a reappraisal or remastered Blu-ray, something like that. Really, because these movies now, I mean, more than anything, they're an education about how to do things, even though what happened, what we're looking at now is the result of the failure of those movies. We're seeing producers running the whole show. Like I said, Cimino needed a good producer. We both said it. But now producers have completely taken over. If you look at any movie or television series now, there are like 20, 30 40 producers on any given project. And it seems like their administrative practices have now taken over movies. It's like
But
have you ever looked at like when you go to the movies now, or you look in a new movie, there's a producer credit and it says PGA after it. PGA, the Producers Guild of America. Who gives a fuck what guild they're a part of? They're doing that to instill their own power into this process.
And to think about it this way, all this could have been avoided if Michael Cimino would have been checked, gotten in check, and played ball the right way.